Welcome to the Greater Irvine Chamber Business Insights podcast series, where we address challenges and ideas for early-stage and entrepreneurial business leaders. Your host today is Dave Coffaro, Interim President and CEO of the Greater Irvine Chamber.
Well, hello, folks, and welcome to the Greater Irvine Chamber Business Insight podcast. I'm Dave Coffaro, and I'm glad to be with you today. One topic that it seems like we can't talk enough about is artificial intelligence. It's in the news. Governments across the planet are talking about ways to understand it and, of course, regulate it. And businesses of all sizes are looking for ways to integrate it into their activities. Some of the tools of AI have become super widely available and accessible and easy to use, which means a lot of you, our listeners, are using it in your business today, like I am. And AI comes with a really tremendous cool factor. It is very cool, but it also brings a growing list of concerns. So the focus of our conversation today is AI data privacy in order to help you navigate the sometimes murky waters of AI usage. My guests for this conversation are Keelin Conant, Senior Solution Advisor at Alvaka, rapid ransomware restoration and tailored network hardening, Dr. Sophia Ononye, founder and CEO of the Sophia consulting firm and author of the book Amplifying Scientific Innovation, and Stephen Toland, head of the Austin office of the Ferguson, Braswell, Fraser, and Kubasta law firm, which also has an office right here in Irvine. And they also focus their energy on AI compliance. So a fantastic group of folks to deal with this topic. Steve, let's start with you. So understanding the landscape, how do AI tools typically interact with personal and confidential data in businesses like those in our community? For example, we've got a lot of CPAs, financial firms, IT or marketing consultants. What are some examples of how sort of confidential data could be misused, and how does that occur?
Great question. I'll start with saying that the cool factor of AI does get diminished a little bit when you involve me in it. Just saying that, like I'm the last person. I'm kind of the last person who thinks in the cool factor of AI, but I'm fascinated by it. So I think the way to answer that, it's a broad question. I love the question. Is it kind of depends on which AI type you're using. So there's what we call predictive AI and generative AI. And so an example maybe for a CPA firm would be a big picture one might be fraud detection. So you can certainly minimize liability, probably lower your insurance risks and the chance of being sued, for example, if you have more accuracy in detecting potential fraud on returns or minimizing the risk of audits for your clients. And so you could see a CPA firm applying some type of AI compliance program externally facing, right? So I'll use the two more buzzwords, internal and external. So you've got kind of AI that could be used by the firm internally, probably not as likely in a CPA firm, maybe more in a marketing consultant, and or you could see the external, which is your client's input data. Or once they have the returns in there, then that data is inputted in, and then it will run all kinds of predictive models to determine the likelihood of potentially an audit or something like that, like fraud detection. So that's how it can be used. But depending on your practice area, we'll hit this a lot today. So important you understand the regulations that apply to your particular industry. It's very, very niche or industry specific. And there's all kinds of ways that we help clients every day minimize their risk. But it always starts with knowing, the data you're collecting, what you're using the data for, how long are you going to keep the data, are you going to delete it after, and then what safety provisions do you have through your risk management of the AI model that you've adapted and incorporated into your program.
So what I hear with that, Steve, is proceed with caution. Understand the industry specific cautions, regulations, requirements, and then the general requirements, right? Just be mindful before you jump in and start analyzing stuff.
I think that's a great point. I think a potential takeaway today, I think there's a lot of attention. At least I feel that with my clients. Understandably, they're looking to their left, they're looking to their right, and they're seeing what they think are their competitors all integrating these sophisticated AI applications. And they feel this understandable pressure to get in quickly. But I would say that you've got regulators, some of the smartest people in the country on consistent bases saying we're still catching up. Regulators are still learning this. It is an ever evolving field, and that's not just Pollyannish or lip service. That's true. And so it's okay to take a break. It's okay to have that healthy tension amongst business owners that we really want to use AI to minimize cost and to be a better performing business, and to tout that is a differentiator in the marketplace. But we're also leery. And so it's okay to have that. So, take a breath, keep learning, keep consulting with experts, and then eventually you'll find the right program. So I do agree with you. I think it's a great way to say it, Dave. Like, proceed with caution, but nonetheless proceed. This is a great tool. Just be careful.
So that kind of leads into something, Dr. Sophia, I want to ask you about. Given your work in the scientific, clinical, healthcare arena, what are some of the common ways you see AI tools unintentionally expose or mishandle sensitive personal information? And are there some recent examples that you're aware of that you can share with our audience?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think with AI, I mean, obviously, we're all still sort of wrapping our heads around it, right? What does AI mean? How are we informing the data sets? Where are the information coming from? Who is programming the data? Who is assessing the data? Where are the data? I mean, and so with healthcare, the risk of AI, I would say it's quite vast. I mean, we're looking at everything from data poisoning attacks, to data privacy and security issues. We have automation biases, such as the ones that I mentioned. Again, who are the people that are collecting information and where are they getting the information from? And then we also have biases and inequalities that already exist within the healthcare systems, right? When it comes to something like clinical trial diversity, those are topics that I've discussed quite often on my podcast, right? Because traditionally, even women were included in clinical trials more recently, like in recent years. And when we look at racial and ethnic diversity, that is still an issue across the board. So our understanding of AI is still quite dynamic, and so information itself is imperfect. And what we understand from AI is that AI recognizes data patterns, right? And so the more we the more we know, the better we're able to utilize it. So to instance of the questions that you asked, what are some recent examples? I mean, I think um two come to top of mind to me. One was quite recent. It involved a company called Nuance Communications, which some of our audience might be familiar with. It's a Microsoft-owned AI company. And they had this sort of software vulnerability called Move It that led to a breach that affected, I think the number was 1.2 million patients across 13 healthcare clients. And these include prominent names that we know of, like the Duke University Health System, the Atrium Health. And they found out later that it was a group called CLOP, CLOP. The CLOP ransomware group was responsible for this attack. So this is one example. Another example that happened in 2024 is also the data breaches that were caused from malware attacks on various U.S. healthcare organizations. Beyond the ones that I've talked about, I think the total number is roughly 14 million people so far have been affected by data breaches. And this is what we know, right? And imagine what we do not know. So I think there's still a lot of uncertainty. You don't know what you don't know. And because of that, we don't exactly know what we are giving ourselves. What happens when we share information? What happens when you download an app on your phone and you say, okay, hey, I'm going to report whether it's something like your blood pressure, what happens to that information? And then we have discrepancies between global and national and international laws. We've heard about GPDR, for example, in terms of understanding how we regulate data. So because the system AI is an emerging technology, it's still new. The infrastructure that we have in place in terms of data analytics and processing is still nascent. And then the way that patients understand what's going on is still evolving. So the combination of all that uncertainty obviously is going to lead to a high risk. And risk mitigation is always going to be important for everybody, from a chief executive officer to a chief data officer. But now when you think about the healthcare system, what makes it even more challenging is that these are human lives that are involved, and we're all patients and caregivers across the timeline, right? Across the timelines of our lives. So, how are we as individuals responsible for our own data, and how are we urging the system as well to be responsible, ethical, conscious in terms of how we use data, in terms of how we inform people of the data that they are sharing, and our awareness of these risks and how to better mitigate them. So it's not a simple, obviously, it's not a simple question, it's not a simple problem, but these are the sort of the challenges that are going to sort of determine how well we adopt, implement, and integrate AI in our daily systems when it comes to a healthcare management perspective.
Part of what I get out of what you said, Sophia, is that there's sort of a couple of sides that our audience can think about. One is in your business. So whether you're a healthcare practitioner of some sort or anyone who's touching confidential data, you have to be really, really careful. But for all of us as patients, as consumers, we have to be mindful of the apps that we use or the places we provide our data. And as you were saying that, I was thinking, this year, probably more times than any year in the past, I've gotten those letters in the mail that say, this is to inform you that your data may have been compromised at your doctor or your dentist or your insurance company or whatever. So it's really good advice for us as consumers, as well as business owners, business people, to be mindful of where we're providing our data to make sure they've got the right governance in place to manage it. Keelin, what responsibilities do business AI users hold in terms of kind of protecting their customers' confidential information? And the AI tool developers, do they bear any of the responsibility for this protection?
Yeah. So thanks for having me. Appreciate it. And a lot of what I'm about to say is going to echo Stephen and Dr. Sophia, is that businesses are responsible for ensuring that any AI tools that they implement, that they use, are complying with their privacy policies and help protect customer data. With that said, it is the business owner's responsibility to implement and know the AI vendors' privacy policies and how they're protecting their customers' data. So it's about a bit of a chain reaction. And then also, as consumers of AI, we again also have responsibility to protect any sensitive information. So I mean, I use chat gpt all the time. There's all kinds of AI tools out there, and we have to be very, very discerning and conscious about what sort of data we're putting in there, and then understanding where it's going. To answer your question about the developers, we all get to wear the responsibility hat. And I don't know if these AI companies are always 100% upfront about where their data is coming from, how the chain is working. AI can hallucinate, they say, and it'll make things up. Well, if it's hallucinating, making things up, where did that data come from? It came from somewhere. So it is um, searching the web, it is searching other databases. So I think it's really important, while we're facing this wild frontier of AI, that we all take a breath and continue to play with it and to be curious about it, but also understand that there's a lot we don't know yet. So being cautious about that, the sources of the information is important.
Part of what I heard you say, and this is a message I think we all need to remember, is, I'm paraphrasing you, but we can't just step back and say, it's the AI developer's fault if something happens, something goes wrong and our data are breached, right? It means
Correct.
we as the business owners, the business leaders, we own that responsibility. We have to defend our customers, clients, partners, members' data.
We do. We do. And Dr. Sophia was talking about, a ransomware gang, and we work Alvaka works with ransomware restoration a lot. And when we're looking at the forensics and working with the forensic companies, it, it it's not ever like a finger pointing. It's more of a curiosity of how did this attack happen? And I think we need to have that same neutral approach when we're using AI, because it's a beautiful, powerful tool, but we do have an epidemic happening of our data being leaked. So it's really finding, that middle ground of how can we keep things safe, but also drive innovation.
That point sort of contextualizes because we don't want to be paranoid, but we have to be mindful because there are people who spend all day, every day, finding ways to hack and capture data.
They're literally driving innovation. It's crazy. It's really interesting.
That is amazing. Steve, let's shift to you. What are some of the current data privacy regulations that govern potential misuses of data via AI? And is there kind of a current legal and regulatory environment? Is it aligned with where AI apps are, or is it kind of lagging? Is there a gap? What does that look like from your perspective?
Gosh, it's probably lagging. I mean, I think everyone would say that it is, wouldn't say woefully behind, but I think it's important to note that we're missing comprehensive. Well, we don't have an omnibus bill on data privacy, so it's understandable. We certainly don't have one on AI. Obviously, states like Colorado have led the way in that, but I think a way to provide some specificity to listeners who are thinking in terms of, all right, what does that mean for me to avoid and minimize risk? The best thing I would say, first and foremost, is look at federal and sometimes state, but look at guidances, or I'm not sure the right vernacular to say that, but these agencies will issue guidance that will communicate kind of where their enforcement priorities are. And so while there's not a federal omnibus bill on this, there are federal agencies who have uniformly signed on to these guidances that they've been issued, and they'll clearly state unequivocally AI applies to existing data privacy regulations and concerns. So the first thing I always advise a client for is, let's go back to our data privacy plan. Did we have a risk assessment done? Did we have an impact assessment, a data flow assessment? And do you have a data flow governance plan that you're required to have anyway, particularly in California and other states? And so let's go to that, and then let's work on incorporating best practices for AI governance programs into that program. So yes, it's clear that agencies are regulating it, but they're doing it, not surprisingly, in a way that mirrors data privacy. So you need to document, in other words, your AI governance. If you hire a technology partner to work with, then you want to regularly, what I would say, almost stress out your systems. I don't have time to go into the granular level of like red teaming and purposely trying to test the reliability and accuracy of your AI application. But those same rules apply, Dave. The same rules that apply to data governance. Really, I would start with those, and then I'll say one more part about that. It is clear the enforcement priorities of late have been um, misrepresentation under the FTC. And then we've seen states like Texas enforce this. California has been a leader in this. You have to be careful how you market the use of your AI as a differentiator for your product. So that's a big area that's already being actively enforced. So I always counsel business owners, like, let's start with what we already know from an enforcement perspective. And so what that can look like is just like a large hospital group touting that the use of their AI delivers more reliable and accurate diagnoses of cancer through the review of blood testing or certain markers, biomarkers, whatever. If you're saying we have an accurate 97.9% or whatever, you have to be able to document to regulators, where are you getting this, I would call it more than a KPI. Like, it's more than a key performance indicator. It's like a specific um, statement you're making about the accuracy of your product through the AI application, you have to document that. You got to show that to regulators. And if you don't, then it's already clear that 5 and 18 sections of the FTC, for example, or in many states, yeah, they have power. Even we've seen states through their Deceptive Trade Practice Act and their local state legislature, they're using that as an enforcement tool, and it's been upheld legally. So start with the basics of what we know about data privacy if your state doesn't have a specific AI law already in place.
That is a really important responsibility for everyone listening to this podcast. And there's sort of a couple of themes that come out of it. We know what we know today, but I also heard you say or imply that there's a lot more to come. And so we can't wait until there is an omnibus solution. We have to preemptively mitigate risk today as business owners. Really important takeaway. Dr. Sophia, what risks arise when AI models are trained on data sets containing confidential information? And how can organizations ensure that AI training doesn't inadvertently expose personal information?
Yeah, I mean, I think it ties into what we just discussed a few minutes ago, right? Just in terms of the frequency of these data breaches affecting millions of people. So there's always that risk whenever you share anything with anyone. Imagine this, you have a family secret. The moment you share it with one person, I don't know, maybe it's no longer a secret, right? We hear that all the time. So whenever you put your information out there, there's always a potential for an inadvertent exposure of sensitive information, and that comes from the way that these models are built. So AI, as we talked about, is a pattern recognizer. So it's looking at the information that it's seen before, and then it's trying to make inferences to see, okay, what can we learn from what we know before? So the only ways that organizations can mitigate this is by becoming more serious around, cybersecurity, understanding how to use data and anonymity. Yeah, we can't even say that word, but how do we anonymize the data techniques so that the people feel a little bit a better sense of control? And then we have to think about stronger access controls. And then how do we employ data audits before we need it? We have a tendency as humans to respond or to react than to be proactive, because you go through your to-do list every day and you say, hey, if nothing is happening, then I have nothing to worry about. But the future of healthcare and the future of data management and data privacy is really about being proactive, and then thinking about how to train your models, right? How do we leverage the information that we know to train the models against inversion attacks? And that's, by thinking about how you could sort of reverse engineer the whole process and then figure out what kind of sensitive data do you need to extract, and then how do you feed the information so you can continuously learn from it. And then there has to be sometimes some kind of, I guess, punishment. I don't know. As human beings, maybe we want to know what happens to the people that are breaching our data. Do they just do it and then keep doing it? Do we have any sort of punitive measures? Because we hear about the data breaches, but it kind of just ends there. So I think people need to know that there are punitive measures, there are privacy violations, because whenever that data breaches for the healthcare organizations, it causes reputational damage, and that's something that I don't think we've enforced. So what happens to organizations when people keep complaining about their data being breached? People are going to go elsewhere. It doesn't matter how sophisticated your healthcare systems might be. There's always another healthcare system, even if people have to fly or drive or do something to get out there. So trust is key. Already at a time where people are struggling to trust the government, struggling to trust their healthcare systems. And then there are also different nuances as we have this conversation, right? Because there are some ethnic groups that might be more prone to worry about their data. So, for example, we've heard about the Henrietta Lacks debacle, where a woman who had ovarian cancer, she was not informed about it, and her cells called HeLa cells were used. I mean, I used those cells even when I worked in the lab without the families being informed about it. And so a lot lot of African Americans think about, the hematolax issues, the Tuskegee experiments, and they say, do people really care about us? And if they don't care, then why should we be so willing to share our data? But having said all of this, it still boils down to a personal choice, because with healthcare, even if government makes a mandate, even if for vaccination, you still have your personal rights to determine what you want to say yes and what you want to say no to. And we could never take those rights away from anyone. But I think there is so much that we can learn. And I think the biggest key to learning is through transparency and user education. And just, a theme that I've brought about, just ethical considerations, being mindful of the potential social and ethical implications of using AI models that are trained on sensitive data.
Yeah, that says a lot to our audience, that owning that ethical responsibility, it's up to us. It's that's something that's really hard to legislate, to regulate.
Accountability, yeah.
Accountability, and also the reputation risk that you mentioned, right? There's always the financial dimension, but sometimes the penalties are so much less than the reputation damage that anyone could experience by misuse of these data or exposure of the data. There is something, and Sophia, you touched on it, but Keelin, I want to ask you this question. We hear about AI biases. So what does that mean, and how can these biases lead to privacy risks?
So an AI bias happens when the AI model is starting to learn from data that reflects certain biases. So, um, as we're using AI, it's there to support us. It's there to learn from us, from the humans. So, if there's a company that is very, very biased and only likes green apples, then the AI is going to start to learn from that, and it's going to start skewing its answers and its results to say, hey, this company, I know that they are a stand for green apples. So that bias will just continue to grow. It's just like in social media. Our social medias, the algorithm starts to really look at our biases. So AI is no different, and it's actually happening a lot faster. So it's important to remember that, because the flip side of that is it could expose information. It could discriminate against certain groups if the AI is used in any customer-facing application. So we just need to be mindful and responsible. But I will give you a flip side of that as well, is if you are very niched in your business and you're all about green apples, then the AI is going to help you stay focused and continue to create, let's say, great content towards those green apples, right? So there's always a flip side to all of these conversations. And as far as the privacy piece goes, we just want to be mindful of the input that we're putting in has the potential to expand in ways that we're not necessarily foreseeing quite yet.
So Keelin, on the mindfulness front, what role does human oversight play in ensuring AI applications don't unintentionally misuse confidential information?
Yeah, I love this question. Thank you. Because I think that this is where the fear is around AI, is that, we're going to feed it, but we don't know how big it's going to get. It's like if you get a puppy, right? And you think it's only going to be 20 pounds, and then it grows and it's 150 because the person who sold me the puppy, or let me adopt it, didn't really tell me the truth about it. I think AI has that potential as well. So it's very important for us as humans, the information that we're putting into it, the energy we're putting into it, being mindful again of what we're creating in there. And I would like to echo that sentiment to anyone who is an AI developer. You really have the potential to create these learning machines that are really being birthed. And when we just want to really be mindful about what kind of energy we're putting into it and what sort of information we're allowing it to access, because once we sort of see it forming and growing, there is the potential of it accessing, and we've already seen it happen, accessing pieces of data that could be detrimental to our businesses and to our families even.
I've got this image of puppies growing into their paws, and AI has some really, really big paws here.
Big paws, man, really big paws. So we just want to feed it. We want to feed it and train it in very
Yeah.
ethical ways, so it doesn't pee all over your house.
Well said. Steve, let's go to you as we come down the home stretch here. What are some ways that businesses in our community right here can implement the appropriate oversight measures to make sure they don't get themselves into trouble?
That's a great question. I think depends on whether you're working with an existing technological partner, like a tech partner or a vendor that you've hired to help you create an AI governance program, or whether you've hired an attorney like myself to help you with that. Um, so that's the first piece. I think is that you not touting myself for business here. I'm just saying you do need the help of a professional at some point. And state regs and federal regs are going to require you to document the existence of an ongoing framework and so let's look at NIST. And so NIST is should get the acronym wrong, but it's the National Institute for Safeguards Technology. I always get that kind of backwards. But um, for those who don't know this, it's been around forever. It started in cybersecurity space, and they have an excellent sort of framework broken out for AI governance programs. And it's basically to govern, map, measure, and manage. And so go back again to your data flow assessment, go back to the beginning of your data plan. And then as you start incorporating AI into that, you're going to need to do the same thing you did with your data, only you're going to do it with data that is used and implemented in the context of your AI application. So governing is the absolute first function of the framework. And so it's so important that you have that plan in place. As you're looking at oversight, obviously you need to have a clear plan and a designated, whether that's a committee or a team or, somebody needs to take ownership of that with inside your company, because a lot of your listeners are going to be smaller businesses, entrepreneurial based. And so they may just rely on the tech partner to do all that, or they may want to be a little more hands on. And so as they're doing that, they may be the person doing that. Right. And so, I recommend NIST's website. I recommend, just getting a little bit up to speed with the vernacular and then hiring a professional to help you with that oversight. But when you develop your clear plan and you manage it, then you've got to resist the temptation that I think Keelin and everyone was talking about, which is, the AI program is only as good as it is accurate, right? I mean, if it's not accurate and not learning and growing, like this, hopefully this puppy grows into its paws and it turns out to be a very healthy dog, right? But it could grow and then turn into be a very unhealthy, awkward looking dog, I guess, if we're sticking with this analogy here.
Right, right.
And what that can result from is the lack of accurate information plugged into the AI model. So there's a tension there to sometimes overlook when different third-party vendors have access to confidential information. So my last sort of tip here in the oversight for business owners listening to our program today is, don't forget about the privacy commitments you've made, those warranties and representations you've made through your data privacy policy on your website, or however you communicate that to your data subjects, i.e. your customers. You've made privacy commitments about when their data can be used. So you better have permission from them if you're sharing it in an AI model, and then allowing that information to help you grow and evolve your puppy AI program into a mature dog, so to speak. I really was going to hold that analogy all the way through, wasn't that? But
Well done.
it's kind of my big picture tips, I guess.
Well done. Thank you for that. Dr. Sophia, we're going to wrap it up with you. So, what are some best practices that can help prevent the unintentional misuse of personal or confidential data with AI applications?
Yeah, I mean, I think it ties into much of what we've all sort of brought up. The more we know, the better we're able to manage what we don't know, because obviously that's how AI works. But then that's a conundrum in itself. How do you manage the unknown? But I think a good starting point is to think about the data privacy regulations. How well do we understand? Even we've talked about what's going on in California here, the California Consumer Privacy Act, the CCPA. How many people even understand what that means? And then if you think about the GDPR laws, which I mentioned earlier. Those are the General Data Protection Regulation laws in Europe that protects the privacy and security of personal data. So I think as business leaders, regardless of the size of your organization, whether you have 2 employees or you have 20,000, I think there's a fundamental need to understand compliance. How are we complying with relevant data privacy regulations, whether it's at the state, local, national, or even international level? And then thinking about anonymizing data, that's another word that comes up. How do we make that happen as frequently as possible? And then even the whole process of data minimization. I never thought that all these years of studying chemistry that I'll be saying data so much, but it would have to do more around AI, right? How do we think about strong encryption methods that we're using to further give people that confidence that their data are not going to be shared with anyone else? And then we mentioned earlier around security audits. Again, it shouldn't happen because there was a disaster or an issue. It should be something that we should do regularly so that way you can sort of fix the problem or get at the issue before it becomes too late. And then education, much like in everything else, especially when you're dealing with the unknown. If we don't know 200 things and we know 3 things, well, at least we know 3 things, and we could start with that and leverage what we know. Again, the privacy laws, for example, the need to audit, the need to encrypt data, the need to inform people whenever possible about what they are entailing themselves into. And I know much of the time we don't even read some of those like fine print. It's like, I don't have time for this. I'm just going to click yes. But I would urge us, in the future, starting in 2025, maybe, whatever we've done in 2024, that's fine. But for starting in 2025, let us promise ourselves that before we download our next app or we start using our next app and we're reading through stuff or just clicking yes, just take the time to understand what you're granting access to, because much of the time we are so busy in today's world where we're multitasking. We pride ourselves on being busy, which is also not a good thing. If you start to think about, heart disease frequencies, heart disease is the #1 cause of death in the United States, and that's a reality, right? So busy is not always a good thing. Let's take the time to center ourselves, make sure we're aware of the information that we're giving people access to, especially when it comes to your healthcare data. I think we're all sensitive, as we should be, because that's your private information. And one of my favorite quotes, since I was asked to close, is by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Our health is our wealth, and we should take pride in it. And so as a result of that, and with all the data breaches that we've heard about, paranoia about who we're giving access to, how long that access is being given to, is it for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, forever? Let's just take the time to make sure we're understanding what we're giving people access to, especially when it comes to our health data.
Wonderful way to wrap it up. And back to the beginning, I think that any podcast that ends with a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson is very cool. So Dr. Sophia, Steve, Keelin, thank you so much for bringing your expertise to this really important conversation. Folks, I know you got a lot out of it. I took a lot of notes. So it is very, very valuable, actionable advice. So thank you all for joining us. Have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for the Greater Irvine Chamber Business Insights podcast. To stay informed about upcoming podcasts and other important business news, please subscribe to our channel or check the Greater Irvine Chamber website.